From suicidal single mother on welfare to the richest author in history, discover how J.K. Rowling's darkest moments birthed the most magical story ever told. This is the ultimate tale of triumph over despair, proving that rock bottom can become the foundation for extraordinary success. Prepare for pure inspiration and literary magic.
Narrative: J.K. Rowling, from welfare to wizarding world. In a cramped Edinburgh flat where mold crept up the walls and the heating barely worked, a desperate single mother sat at a small cafe table with her sleeping baby beside her, scribbling frantically in a notebook filled with stories about a boy wizard who lived in a cupboard under the stairs. Completely unaware that these words would eventually make her richer than the Queen of England and create the most beloved literary phenomenon of the modern era. This wasn't just any struggling writer with impossible dreams. This was Joanne Kathleen Rowling, who would transform from a suicidal, benefit-dependent mother into the architect of a magical universe that would enchant billions of readers, revolutionize children's literature, and prove that sometimes the darkest moments in life can be the birthplace of the most extraordinary magic. Born on July 31, 1965, in Yate, Gloucestershire, to Peter and Rowling, Joanne entered a world that seemed ordinary on the surface but was quietly nurturing the imagination that would later captivate the globe. Her father worked as an aircraft engineer for Rolls-Royce, while her mother was a science technician, creating a household that valued both technical precision and scientific curiosity. The Rowling family represented middle-class English stability, but beneath this conventional exterior, young Joanne was developing an inner world of fantasy and storytelling that would prove far more powerful than any reality. Her earliest memory of storytelling came at age 6, when she wrote her first story about a rabbit called Rabbit who got measles and was visited by his friends, including a giant bee named Miss Bee. This seemingly innocent childhood tale contained all the elements that would later define her writing: anthropomorphic characters, friendship in times of crisis, and the triumph of community over adversity. Even as a small child, Joanne understood instinctively that the best stories were about characters who faced impossible odds but found strength through connection with others. The family's move to Winterbourne when Joanne was 9 provided her with the rural English landscape that would later inspire many locations in the Harry Potter series. The countryside around their new home, with its mysterious forests, ancient churches, and winding paths, became the playground where her imagination flourished. She spent countless hours exploring alone, creating elaborate fantasy worlds populated by magical creatures and heroic characters who faced dangers that mirrored her own childhood fears and anxieties. Her relationship with her younger sister Diane was complex and competitive, with both girls vying for their parents' attention while developing very different personalities. Joanne was the dreamy, bookish child who preferred reading to almost any other activity, while Diane was more practical and socially confident. This dynamic would later influence her portrayal of sibling relationships in her novels, where she consistently explored themes of loyalty, jealousy, and the complicated bonds that tie families together even during difficult times. School presented both opportunities and challenges for young Joanne, who excelled academically but struggled socially with the kind of awkwardness that would later make her adolescent characters so relatable to millions of readers. She was the student who lived in books rather than participating in playground politics, often feeling like an outsider observing a world she couldn't quite navigate successfully. Her teachers recognized her exceptional writing ability, but few could have predicted that this quiet, somewhat odd girl would become one of the most successful authors in literary history. The family's move to Tuthill near Chepstow when Joanne was 14 proved traumatic, as she was forced to leave behind familiar surroundings and start over at Y Dean School, where she felt even more isolated and different from her peers. The headmaster at Y Dean was particularly strict and intimidating, later serving as partial inspiration for the character of Professor Snape. This period of adolescent misery would profoundly influence her understanding of teenage angst and the feeling of being trapped in circumstances beyond one's control. Her mother's diagnosis with multiple sclerosis when Joanne was 15 created a shadow over the family that would influence every aspect of her future writing. Watching her vibrant, intelligent mother gradually lose her physical capabilities while maintaining her sharp mind and loving spirit taught Joanne profound lessons about courage, mortality, and the difference between physical weakness and inner strength. The experience of watching someone you love face an incurable disease with dignity would later inform her nuanced portrayal of characters dealing with loss and the inevitability of death. University at Exeter provided Joanne with her first taste of independence and intellectual freedom, though she later admitted that she spent more time writing stories and reading novels than focusing on her French and classics degree. Her professors recognized her talent but worried about her apparent lack of career direction, having no idea that her unfocused approach to education was actually intensive preparation for her future career as a novelist. The classical education she received, particularly her study of ancient languages and mythology, would later provide the foundation for the complex magical world she would create. After graduation, Joanne moved to London and worked various jobs, including stints at Amnesty International, where she witnessed firsthand the testimonies of people who had survived torture and oppression under authoritarian regimes. This exposure to real-world evil and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systematic cruelty would profoundly influence her later portrayal of the wizarding world's struggle against Voldemort and his followers. The darkness in her novels was never gratuitous but came from a deep understanding of how power corrupts and how ordinary people can become complicit in evil systems. The train journey from Manchester to London in 1990 became the most significant commute in literary history when the idea for Harry Potter simply appeared in her mind, fully formed and vivid. She later described it as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room, suddenly illuminating an entire world that had been waiting there all along. The delay of the train gave her 4 hours to develop the initial concept, creating the basic outline of characters and plot that would sustain 7 novels and launch a global entertainment empire. But the path from inspiration to publication would prove far more challenging than that magical moment of conception. Her mother's death from multiple sclerosis just 6 months after Joanne conceived Harry Potter devastated her emotionally while adding profound depth to her understanding of loss and grief. The themes of death, sacrifice, and the persistence of love beyond the grave that would become central to the Harry Potter series emerged directly from this personal tragedy and her struggle to process the loss of the person who had been her greatest supporter and inspiration. Seeking escape from her grief and desperate for a fresh start, Joanne moved to Portugal to teach English, where she met Jorge Arends, a Portuguese television journalist. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage and the birth of her daughter Jessica in 1993, but the relationship quickly turned abusive. Joanne found herself trapped in a marriage where her husband's violent outbursts alternated with periods of charm and apology, creating the kind of psychological manipulation that would later inform her portrayal of toxic relationships and the way power can corrupt even intimate connections. The marriage collapse left Joanne in desperate circumstances, a single mother with no money, no job prospects, and nowhere to live except her sister's spare room in Edinburgh. The move to Scotland represented both a retreat and a potential new beginning, but the reality of single motherhood in poverty proved harder than any fantasy she had ever imagined. The Edinburgh flat she eventually found was damp, cold, and barely habitable, with a radiator that barely worked and windows that let in more cold than light. The period that followed represented the darkest chapter of Joanne's life, as she struggled with severe depression, suicidal thoughts, and the daily humiliation of relying on government benefits to survive. She later described this time as feeling like she had failed at every aspect of adult life, as a wife, as a mother, as a provider, and as a human being. The shame of being on welfare in a society that stigmatized single mothers was almost overwhelming, but it also provided her with first-hand understanding of how economic insecurity affects every aspect of a person's life and relationships. During this period, writing became both her salvation and her torment. She could only work on her novel when baby Jessica was sleeping, often in cafés where the heating was better than in her flat and where she could nurse a single cup of coffee for hours while scribbling in notebooks she could barely afford. The Elephant House Cafe in Edinburgh became her unofficial office, where she would sit for hours crafting the magical world that served as an escape from her increasingly desperate circumstances. The creation of Harry Potter during this period was deeply influenced by her personal experiences of powerlessness, isolation, and the feeling of being unwanted by society. Harry's life in the cupboard under the stairs, his treatment by the Dursleys, and his sense of being fundamentally different from everyone around him reflected Joanne's own feelings of being trapped and misunderstood. But she also imbued Harry with the resilience and hope that kept her going during her darkest days, creating a character who could find magic and friendship even in the most unpromising circumstances. The writing process was painstakingly slow, partly because of her circumstances but also because of her perfectionist approach to crafting every sentence. She developed elaborate backstories for characters who would appear only briefly in the books, created detailed histories for Hogwarts and the wizarding world, and established complex rules for how magic worked that would remain consistent throughout the entire series. This attention to detail, born partly from having plenty of time but no money, would later be recognized as one of the key factors in the series' success. Her approach to children's literature was revolutionary in its refusal to condescend to young readers or shield them from difficult themes. She believed that children were capable of understanding complex moral questions, dealing with loss and death, and appreciating sophisticated storytelling if it was presented with respect for their intelligence. This philosophy emerged from her own childhood experiences of feeling patronized by adults who underestimated her emotional and intellectual capabilities. The rejection letters began arriving in 1995, as publisher after publisher declined to take on the story of the boy wizard. 12 publishing houses rejected Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, with many claiming that children's books about boarding schools were outdated, that the book was too long for the target audience, or that fantasy novels for children had limited commercial appeal. Each rejection felt like a personal invalidation, confirming her fears that she was deluding herself about her abilities as a writer. The breakthrough came through Christopher Little Literary Agency, where agent Bryony Evans pulled the manuscript from the rejection pile and recognized its potential. Even then, the agency struggled to find a publisher, with the manuscript being rejected by numerous houses before finally landing on the desk of Barry Cunningham at Bloomsbury. Cunningham later admitted that he was initially skeptical but was won over by the book's originality and the strength of Joanne's voice. The acceptance by Bloomsbury in 1996 should have been a moment of pure triumph, but the advance of £1,500 was barely enough to make a difference in Joanne's financial situation. The publisher's lack of confidence was evident in their modest first print run and their suggestion that she use initials rather than her full name to avoid potentially alienating boy readers who might be reluctant to read a book written by a woman. The adoption of J.K. Rowling, with the K standing for Kathleen, her grandmother's name, represented both a compromise with commercial expectations and a small act of family homage. The publication of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in June 1997 created ripples that would soon become a tsunami. Initial reviews were positive but not particularly prescient about the cultural phenomenon that was about to unfold. The book's success was organic and word-of-mouth driven, as children discovered Harry's story and insisted their friends, siblings, and parents read it too. Libraries reported unprecedented demand, bookstores couldn't keep it in stock, and teachers noticed that previously reluctant readers were suddenly devouring thick books with enthusiasm. The acquisition of American publishing rights by Scholastic for an unprecedented $105,000 signaled that industry professionals were beginning to recognize the series' commercial potential. The American publisher's decision to change the title to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone reflected concerns about cultural translation, but also demonstrated the challenges of bringing British cultural specificity to global audiences. This tension between local authenticity and international appeal would continue throughout the series' development. The success of the first book created enormous pressure for the sequel, as Joanne found herself catapulted from obscurity to literary celebrity almost overnight. The transition from desperate single mother to successful author was psychologically challenging, as she struggled with imposter syndrome and the fear that her success was a fluke that would be exposed when readers realized she wasn't really talented enough to sustain a series. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, published in 1998, proved that the first book's success wasn't a fluke while establishing Joanne's ability to maintain quality and deepen the magical world with each installment. The second book's darker themes and more complex plot demonstrated her growing confidence as a writer while introducing elements that would become increasingly important as the series progressed toward its ultimate confrontation with Voldemort. The phenomenon truly exploded with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in 1999, which many critics consider the finest book in the series for its sophisticated plotting, character development, and thematic depth. The introduction of time travel, the complexity of Sirius Black's story, and the revelations about Harry's parents elevated the series from children's entertainment to literature that could satisfy readers of all ages. Adult fans began reading the books openly, leading to the unprecedented phenomenon of children's books appearing on adult bestseller lists. The global expansion of Harry Potter fever transformed Joanne from successful author to cultural icon, as translations began appearing in dozens of languages and international sales exploded. The universality of themes like belonging, friendship, the struggle between good and evil, and the journey from childhood to adulthood resonated across cultural boundaries in ways that surprised even Joanne herself. Children from cultures with no tradition of boarding school stories or European-style fantasy were embracing Harry's world with the same enthusiasm as British readers. The film rights acquisition by Warner Brothers for an unprecedented $1 million marked the beginning of Harry Potter as a multimedia empire. Though Joanne's insistence on maintaining creative control and ensuring that the films remained faithful to the book's spirit demonstrated her understanding that commercial success could easily destroy the very qualities that made the series special. Her involvement in casting decisions, script development, and overall vision helped maintain consistency between the books and films that was unusual in Hollywood adaptations. The publication schedule that followed, with new books appearing roughly every 1 to 2 years, created a unique cultural phenomenon where millions of readers worldwide were simultaneously experiencing the same story, discussing plot developments, and theorizing about future events. The gap between books created anticipation that bordered on mania, with bookstores holding midnight release parties and fans camping out to be among the first to read the latest installment. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire in 2000 marked a turning point in the series, as Joanne made the conscious decision to age the content along with her characters and readers. The book's length, nearly twice that of previous installments, and its darker themes of death, corruption, and the return of Voldemort represented her growing confidence in her audience's ability to handle complex storytelling. The book's climax, with Cedric Diggory's death and Voldemort's resurrection, shocked readers who had expected the series to remain safely within children's literature conventions. The cultural impact of Harry Potter extended far beyond literature into education, with teachers reporting that previously reluctant readers were suddenly tackling books voluntarily and asking for recommendations for similar stories. The series revitalized children's interest in reading at a time when video games, television, and early internet content were increasingly dominating young people's attention. Libraries and bookstores saw unprecedented demand for fantasy novels as readers sought stories that could provide similar magical experiences. The religious controversy that erupted around the series, particularly in the United States, where some Christian groups condemned the books for promoting witchcraft, demonstrated the power of literature to provoke passionate responses and serious cultural debate. Joanne's handling of these controversies, with reasoned explanations of her themes and respectful dialogue with critics, showed her evolution from shy single mother to confident public intellectual capable of defending her artistic choices. The charity work that began during this period reflected Joanne's commitment to using her newfound wealth and influence for social good. The establishment of Volant Charitable Trust, her support for multiple sclerosis research in honor of her mother, and her later work with Lumos to help institutionalized children demonstrated that her success hadn't isolated her from the social issues that had shaped her own difficult experiences. Her philanthropy was notable for its focus on systemic change rather than mere charity, addressing root causes of poverty and disadvantage. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix in 2003 represented the series at its most psychologically complex, as Harry dealt with trauma, anger, and the isolation that comes from carrying knowledge that others refuse to acknowledge. The book's exploration of governmental corruption, media manipulation, and the way institutions can fail the people they're meant to protect reflected Joanne's increasingly sophisticated understanding of political and social dynamics. The character of Dolores Umbridge became one of literature's most hated villains not because of magical evil but because of her bureaucratic cruelty and abuse of institutional power. The business empire that grew around Harry Potter, from theme parks to merchandise to video games, created unprecedented opportunities and challenges for maintaining artistic integrity while managing commercial success. Joanne's involvement in major business decisions, particularly her insistence on quality control and thematic consistency, helped preserve the series' coherent vision even as it expanded into multiple media formats and global markets. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince in 2005 deepened the series' exploration of love, sacrifice, and the corrupting influence of pursuing power over others. The book's romantic subplots, combined with increasingly sophisticated magical theory and the revelation of Horcruxes, demonstrated Joanne's ability to balance multiple narrative threads while building toward the series' climactic confrontation. The death of Dumbledore shocked readers and established that no character, no matter how beloved or seemingly essential, was safe from the series' increasingly adult themes. The pressure of writing the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was immense, as Joanne struggled to conclude storylines that had engaged millions of readers while remaining true to the themes and character development she had established over a decade of writing. The book's exploration of mortality, sacrifice, and the choice between power and love represented the culmination of themes she had been developing since Harry's first appearance in the cupboard under the stairs. The completion of the series in 2007 marked both a triumph and a loss for Joanne, who had spent 17 years living with these characters and their world. The massive global success, over 500 million books sold in more than 80 languages, had transformed her from one of the poorest people in Britain to one of the wealthiest, but it had also created a level of public scrutiny and expectation that made normal life virtually impossible. The post-Harry Potter years brought new challenges as Joanne attempted to establish herself as an author beyond the wizarding world. The Casual Vacancy, her first novel for adults, demonstrated her ability to write sophisticated social realism but also revealed how difficult it would be to escape the shadow of her own creation. The book's exploration of class conflict, political hypocrisy, and social decay in a seemingly idyllic English village showed her continuing commitment to examining the gap between appearance and reality in contemporary society. The Cormoran Strike detective series, published under the pseudonym Robert Galbraith, represented her attempt to write without the burden of her famous name and the expectations it carried. The series' initial reception, positive but modest sales until her identity was revealed, demonstrated both her writing ability independent of the Harry Potter brand and the impossibility of truly escaping her literary legacy. Her increasing political engagement, particularly her outspoken support for the Labour Party, Scottish independence campaigns, and various social justice causes, showed her evolution from entertainer to public intellectual willing to use her platform for controversial positions. Her Twitter presence became particularly notable for its combination of fierce political commentary and interactions with fans, creating both admiration and criticism from different segments of her audience. The controversies surrounding her views on transgender issues and women's rights demonstrated the challenges faced by public figures whose opinions on complex social issues don't align neatly with any particular ideological camp. Her position, supporting transgender rights while arguing for the importance of biological sex in certain contexts, provoked passionate responses from multiple sides and showed how difficult it can be to maintain nuanced positions in an increasingly polarized public discourse. The continued expansion of the wizarding world through the Fantastic Beasts film series, the Cursed Child stage play, and various spin-off projects represented both opportunity and risk for the Harry Potter legacy. While these extensions provided new content for fans hungry for more magical stories, they also raised questions about artistic integrity and the tension between creative vision and commercial exploitation. The establishment of the Harry Potter theme parks, first at Universal Studios and later expanding internationally, created immersive experiences that allowed fans to physically enter the magical world they had previously only experienced through reading and film. The attention to detail in recreating locations like Diagon Alley and Hogwarts demonstrated the enduring power of Joanne's imagination while raising questions about the commodification of literary experiences. Her continued charitable work, particularly through Lumos and her support for various children's causes, reflected her understanding that financial success carries social responsibility. Her advocacy for children in institutional care, support for multiple sclerosis research, and contributions to poverty alleviation programs demonstrated consistency with the values embedded in her fictional work, where the powerful are consistently challenged to use their abilities for the benefit of others. The literary analysis and academic study that Harry Potter has inspired, from university courses to scholarly conferences to peer-reviewed research, established the series as legitimate literature worthy of serious critical attention. The book's complex treatment of themes like death, power, prejudice, and moral development has provided rich material for educators and scholars while demonstrating that popular literature can also be intellectually sophisticated. The generational impact of Harry Potter continues to unfold as children who grew up with the series become adults and share the books with their own children. The series has created a shared cultural reference point that spans generations and cultures, providing a common language for discussing fundamental questions about good and evil, friendship and betrayal, courage and cowardice that transcends the specific magical world Joanne created. Today, J.K. Rowling represents both the ultimate publishing success story and a complex figure whose personal views and public statements continue to generate passionate debate. Her journey from desperate single mother to one of the world's most successful authors demonstrates the transformative power of storytelling while raising important questions about celebrity, responsibility, and the relationship between artists and their audiences. The legacy of Harry Potter extends far beyond entertainment to include measurable impacts on literacy rates, children's engagement with reading, and the publishing industry's understanding of young adult literature's commercial potential. The series proved that children and young adults were hungry for complex, challenging stories that respected their intelligence while providing the excitement and emotional engagement that makes reading irresistible. Her story continues evolving as she navigates the challenges of post-Harry Potter life while remaining committed to writing, philanthropy, and public engagement. From that desperate mother scribbling in Edinburgh cafés to one of the most influential authors in literary history, J.K. Rowling's journey proves that sometimes our darkest moments can become the source of light that illuminates not just our own lives but the lives of millions of others who find magic, hope, and belonging in the worlds we create from our deepest struggles and most powerful dreams.
Rowling's journey proves that our greatest struggles can become our greatest strengths. From Edinburgh cafés to global phenomenon, she showed us that storytelling can literally save lives and change the world. Subscribe for more incredible literary transformations. Like if Harry Potter changed your life, share your magical moment.